Hi guys, sorry, not the prettiest of backgrounds yet again, and my hair's also a mess. I'm not prepared for today's video at all. Hi guys, I'm Zach from Nerdworks Media. Welcome back to another podcast in cars. I look crazy right now, I'm really sorry. So today's topic is gonna be, I want to say a little bit of a controversial one, but I actually think a lot of people are gonna at least understand my point. They may not agree, but they'll understand my point. So this the point of today's video, the topic, if you will, is Touge spec over drift spec. What I mean by that is in a lot of I'm actually gonna go a little bit further than that piece of the topic, and I'm gonna say Touge spec over like majority of other specs that you find. That's more so personal preference though, but in terms of what my original statement was, so Touge over drift spec, is what I'm meaning in that is when you look at a car and how it's like set up to race or drive or however you want to say, you get the guys that okay, I'm sorry to the S chassis guys, I'm going to pick on you here for a second, but you are the generic drift car, so yeah. But you'll see the guys with very much the generic body kit, and then it's just like zip tied into place or cable tied or something, who knows. And it's a little bit messy, it's unneat, the bumper's a little bit torn up because of the amount of times that it's probably gone under the car. The design on the car is very drift inspired. My point being is that you can see that that is a drift car. Even if they are street driving it and so on and so forth, you can see that it's a drift car. It's used to be drifted, if that makes sense. Which again, there's nothing wrong with, before anyone comes and attacks me in the comments. I have nothing wrong with that. I'm just simply stating personal preference for myself. And then I wanted to kind of see your guys' opinions on the topic as well. My personal preference for a build, when you're like setting up your build and stuff, is to kind of do a Touge setup. So that's very much like an auto gymkhana setup in terms of how the car should accelerate, how the car should brake, how your gearing should be set up. Top speed is obviously relevant to that as well, because generally you have to sacrifice top speed for acceleration. And then obviously suspension setup as well, which will dictate how easy it is for the car to kick into a drift or not. Now, generally speaking, for Touge, you actually want an exceptionally grippy setup for majority of the corners. It's just one or two hairpins, essentially, that you might have to get the car a little bit sideways, because that might be the fastest way to like kind of hook it and get it to flick around. Now, this is where my argument comes in. I think the guys who build the Touge cars, again though, this is slightly difficult to say because I'm comparing the American drift cars, essentially the guys that you see build these S chassis or 350Zs or whatever, even Miatas are included, into drift cars. When you see them build those into drift cars, a lot of the times they look a bit rough, versus the Japanese Touge cars, which generally speaking also look a bit rough, but they're still exceptionally well kept, if that makes sense. And they're usually really like, they're like clean builds. I don't know how else to describe it. Obviously you do get your rough ones, don't get me wrong, but from the odd few images that I've kind of scrolled across on Google and Instagram and so on and so forth, a lot of the Touge drivers that I find usually have like really clean cars. So I'm like, damn. With that being said, again, why I mentioned I'm thinking the American drift spec is because, well, I don't know why I'm thinking there. I suppose just how my brain is wired off YouTube and stuff. But if you go look at the Japanese drift cars, generally speaking, they're also really clean. Admittedly also quite rough, because again, technically the bumpers tend to go through the vehicles or into a wall or something, so sometimes they can be a bit rough. But In Japanese culture, from what I've seen, obviously somebody can correct me if they've been there and seen it for themselves personally, but from what I've seen off videos of people going there and stuff, is generally speaking, the guys in Japan take really good cares of their car, irrelevant if it's going to go into a wall tomorrow or not. So yeah. But even if we scroll past that, I personally just think that a Touge setup is so much better, because drift guys tend to kind of slam it and then camber it. Obviously that comes with the angle kit that you usually have to run for the front, for more aggressive angle for drifting, blah 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 blah. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry about that. I can't even remember what I was saying. What I was meaning is, generally speaking, I just like the stance and setup of how like a Touge setup car would sit. For those of you who don't know, because I realize I've gone through a fair chunk of this video and I actually haven't explained it. Touge is basically like a canyon road car, a mountain pass car, which in Japan, hence why most of us refer to it as Touge, those mountain roads are a lot more aggressive than what you'd find here, in terms of it's set up more for like very short bursts. Like the most you're actually going to be hitting is maybe like 100 kilometers per hour, maybe 120 on some of the straights, but majority of the time it's actually just like short sprints, first, second gear acceleration between like the very aggressive corners. And personally, that's my favorite kind of driving. That's how I've set up my car, or at least I'm trying to, and so on and so forth. And I just really like the style. I think that Touge setup cars are really nice. Don't get me wrong, obviously show build cars, so cars with like that pin perfect fitment and obviously crisp paint and so on and so forth, those all look very gorgeous, obviously. But my point is, show cars are like kind of a different story, because a lot of the guys take those show cars and they're like never driven besides for shows. I do know a couple people who have show cars that do actually drive them, but my point is that's kind of majority of the people that we're dealing with and speaking about, whilst Touge cars are purpose built to be driven. And I kind of like that setup as well, because drift cars, I find, when you start going super into being a drift car, let me put it this way, it ends up being, you know, very simplistic dash, huge like multi-point roll cage, very high horsepower engine, obviously radical suspension. The car is barely itself, if that makes sense. You've changed so much about it. I mean, most likely speaking, when we get to the more professional side of it, let me put it that way, like it's the whole front end and the whole rear end is a tube chassis. So all that's left of the original car is basically what you can see in this frame now, and that's an extent. And that's over exaggerating, because I mean the dash wouldn't be here, this gauge cluster would be completely different, the steering wheel would most likely be very different, there would be a big hydraulic brake there, the gearbox would probably end up being a sequential at that point, or at very least like a very aggressive box. Generally speaking, there's no aircon, no radio, no luxuries, so on and so forth. The seats would be full on like racing seats with the big bolsters, and obviously you have to wear helmets and that keeps your head straight whilst you're in that. Whilst I've personally found Touge cars never get to that extreme. If they start going to that extreme, they stop being Touge cars and they start being like track cars that just happen to be kind of street legal, and that they drive up and down the mountains. But a lot of the guys that I've seen, again in Japan, from different YouTubers that I watch, who visit Japan or in Japan or so on and so forth, they'll end up saying pretty much exactly what I just said now. A lot of the cars may start out just being small Touge cars, very basic build, but then if the guys start taking it too professionally, they'll end up backing off from the streets and they kind of go for a full-on built track car that's meant, well, for the track. Which is fine, again, everyone to their personal preferences and so on and so forth. I really like, I want to say, that mid-stage, just before you get to like a track car, and how these can be set up. In terms of, I've obviously looked into Miatas, because, well, I own one. But a lot of the cars that I've seen, S2000s, R34, R32, R33 GTRs, Miatas, air chassis for Touge as well. I've seen a couple cars and it looks really good because a lot of the times they might do like a half cage, so it's not a full-on thing that will like it's not like a full-on thing that's going to disrupt here, if that makes sense. It's kind of just like a little, basically what you see a lot of the Miata guys do is just got that bar that comes up here. Maybe some sidebars, but very unlikely. Maybe for Miatas, because that helps with stiffening since we technically haven't got a roof. But yeah. But then there'll be like some classy seats. So there'll be bucket seats, but not like super aggressive bucket seats, but still ones that, you know, you can like move, you know, and like recline and adjust. And I've changed my seating position now, and that's going to be awesome when I try to drive away. Oh well. Anyway, but generally speaking, they'll end up being not that aggressive horsepower wise. It's mainly like pretty much from 200 to 300, maybe 400 horsepower. Depends, if it's like an all-wheel drive build or not. But I know, so how I've built my car is for very quick response from the turbo. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember this from, well, my turbo series. If you haven't watched my build on my turbo Miata, please go enjoy that. There will be my channel somewhere that you can go and click on and go enjoy that content. But yeah, how I've set up my car is that it has very quick spool, which is at the detriment of horsepower. I actually, the turbo has a lot more to give, but then you have to like start having more lag kind of situation, plus minus. Obviously, that's very varying and so on and so forth. But yeah, and what I've found is the quicker response stuff is excellent for auto gymkhana, which is a lot of stuff that I have done, and I've done 1 or 2 mountain passes, but they're very uncommon in my area, so it's a little bit hard to kind of judge. But that's kind of what I'm building my car for, proper Touge setup. And now I know a couple people who know very good Touge roads, but they're very long sweeping corners and stuff like that. They're actually built for more stuff acquainted to kind of, I want to say how like a Ferrari is set up, like a Ferrari 488 kind of setup. It's more about the top speed of things than it is about the handling. Because, okay, so some people will be arguing and mentioning in the comments now, you can have both, the exceptionally well handling car, but also very high top speed. I do agree, but generally speaking, there's a 50-50 payoff. If you want more top speed, you usually have to slack off on aero or basically cornering stuff, or if you want cornering stuff, generally speaking, you have to then slack off the top speed. So there is a nice middle ground, which I do feel a lot of sports cars do hit, obviously, but they're professional people. We're talking about little JDM shitboxes here, okay? But so the Touge roads here are very set up more so for the top speed stuff, and that you can take corners at speed, whilst my car is more so meant up for what I was saying, like the Japanese Touges, which are generally speaking a lot more aggressive and a lot more short. So there's no time for like top speed. It's all about that short burst acceleration, first, second gear kind of acceleration. And that's kind of what I've built my car for. And it's exactly what I'm building my suspension for as well. For those of you who don't know, I'm trying to wiggle worm a situation where I'm getting custom built suspension for my car. And then I'm going to be able to sell that, well, to you guys. That's still a bit down the line, so please bear with me. There's a lot of discussing and business behind the scenes that has to go on with that. But yeah. So yeah. That's kind of my personal preference on how I feel about... Can I open this slightly? I am nervous because there are generators going, because currently here doesn't have power. However, it is exceptionally warm in my car. So that's kind of where I stand with, I want to say at least like the look, at least like the look of the cars. Generally speaking, Touge lands up being built, or looks a lot cleaner. In terms of my personal preference for a build, I also agree Touge is a little bit better. I don't get me wrong, I can appreciate a good muscle car, like drag out car, like a drag car. Why did that take me so many attempts to say? I can appreciate a cool drift car. I can appreciate a cool stance car, even. I can appreciate good show cars. I can appreciate them all. Don't get me wrong. But there's just something that like really resonates with me when a guy's out there with like, it's a street build, but like it's meant for those cool mountain roads that you can play with the guys there, and like you'll give people a good run for their money, you know. Like you could play with a Ferrari on those kind of roads and stuff. And for me, I think the reason why it resonates with me so much and it speaks to me a lot is something I've always spoken about in Miatas, is you get such a good feel as the driver. Like the car communicates so much with you. I can't really speak for the NC ND because I've only test driven an ND for like 30 minutes in total behind the wheel, I suppose. But in terms of like the NA, and I've heard a lot of very similar things about the NA to the NB, so I'm assuming the NB as well. But it's so raw that you can kind of just feel exactly what the car is doing. Oh, I'm starting to slip on the back. Okay, just give it a quick little twitch. Like I'm going to be honest with you, that's happened to me a couple of times. Like I can feel the bum stepping up in the rain or something like that. So it's like, oh, okay. I didn't know how to catch this at all, mind you. I've learned nothing. I know nothing about how to do this. But my default instinct, and I want to say that's through how the car was kind of speaking to me, inverted commas, is tap off slightly, flick in a little bit. Oh, okay, cool. Car's caught itself. Cool. Carry on. As if nothing happened. And I can do that in like a split second without having actually known that previously. Maybe I'm just weird and my car has a really weird relationship with me, but somebody else can let me know down in the comments and then hopefully I won't feel so weird. But yeah, my point being is I have fallen in love with the fact on like how well these kind of cars respond. And I feel like Touge setup cars speak to the driver a lot more. So you get a lot more of that, oh, I know exactly what the car needs right now. I know that if I just twitch the wheel a little bit here, the car will dig in that little bit extra, and I actually have a little bit more grip to go around this bend. Like I could carry a little bit more speed around it. Even though it does currently feel like it's on the limits, I could probably actually do a little bit more. I just have to do this small tweak first. Whether that be I have to adjust the suspension, or I need slightly stifferness somewhere, or maybe it's just a flick of the steering wheel. Maybe I'm on the wrong line and the car's kind of portraying that because of its lean. I don't know. That starts to go a little bit too in depth for me. I can't really comment on that. But I very much experienced that when I was doing the Auto Gymkhana, for example. I'm going to try the door again, sorry. When I was doing the Auto Gymkhana, so I'm going to try to speak a little bit louder because generator. When I was doing the Auto Gymkhana, I really felt how the car like wanted me to do. For example, when I first started, I used to shift into second, but a lot of the times on those Auto Gymkhanas, our gearing is actually long enough in first gear, and that's a weird thing in a Miata because first gear is like super duper short, but how they were setting up the track is my meaning. You could keep it in first and you'll be fine. You won't rev bang, but you'll be like this close to it. So you don't waste time trying to shift. So you're like in acceleration more and so on and so forth. And I can feel, oh, okay, the car's, when I'm like hard on the brakes, it's digging in on the one side. Okay, I know how to fix that. Let me play with it. I don't know how to explain it, but the car like really spoke to me in that regard. And I feel you get a lot of that from a Touge build, then more so than I think you'd get from a top speed build or a drag car or even like a drift car. Drift car I might say is exempt from that, because a drift car, from again what I've heard, I don't personally own a drift car, I can't really comment, but from what I've heard, for drift cars they tend to do a lot of the same. It's like, oh gosh, okay, I can feel I just need that little bit extra of angle, you know, and then I wouldn't have spun out. Or oh, I need that little bit extra horsepower so that I can keep the bum just a little bit extra on that corner, and then I can get additional points or whatever. That's actually something else that I want to bring up. I feel like Touge builds, generally speaking, don't end up being competitive. And now that's really weird because we all think Touge and then we think a line of cars all chasing each other down or up the mountain. Whilst, if you think about it, if you have to like break it down, drag racing, there's the odd street race that you'll go find, but again, when you're talking about full-on drag cars that are running like slicks and stuff, generally speaking, you won't find that on the road. That's like you go to a racetrack to use those kind of cars. For drift cars, again, you'll find a car that's like a half street car with an angle kit and stuff, but you don't have competitions or anything like on the street. It's all competitions are hosted at regular events. I suppose highway builds, like top speed builds, you would find on the road, although that's technically illegal, but we'll move past that. Whilst I find Touge, again, if you start going too extreme with Touge builds, they'll end up just being track builds, and then generally speaking, the guys tap off and they start taking them to track days. Which I suppose you could argue the same for like a drift car or drag car, as I mentioned earlier. So maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but I was going to say, generally speaking, if you've built a Touge car, like a car specific for Touge, you're not really getting involved in races. I know we all watched Initial D, where it's literally a story about Touge racing like there, actual competition, if you will. But I don't know if people get my point. It's generally speaking, if you build a car like that, it's more just for personal experience so that you can go enjoy the car. It's not necessarily for the fact of, oh, I'm building my car to set a really good time. I suppose with that being said, I've built my car to be a Touge car, but then I race it 4 times, and professionally, inverted commas, for Auto Gymkhana. Okay, 50-50 shot there. I'll take that. Maybe my argument is a little bit discredited there then. But yeah, that's kind of just my personal preference for cars and stuff. I mean, I was discussing the other day how in this country we really only get like top speed builds / drag car builds, where a lot of the guys are just so fixated on trying to add horsepower, so that when they land up being on the street next to a guy with a set of lights, they can race him and they'll win, which is all valid and good. If that's what you want your car to do. If you want your car to be a light-to-light monster, then I suppose you want your car to be a light-to-light monster, which eventually turns into like a drag car. Or it's the guys on the highway and it's like, oh, I want to try smoke this BM, so I need a little bit extra horsepower. They get a little bit extra horsepower. Oh, I'm very close to wrecking this Ferrari, let me add a little bit extra horsepower, and then obviously progresses from there. Whilst I feel, because I mean, so where this whole thought process stemmed from, is obviously I've been in a couple of light-to-lights. I'm not going to bullshit you guys. I've been in a couple of light-to-lights with my car as is. Now my car makes about 200 to 220 horsepower to the wheels currently, which, all things considered, for like what I've seen guys get out of these Miata engines, is not a lot. But in a small little lightweight car, it is actually fairly fast, especially again with the gear ratios. First and second take off, you fly. And I've been in a couple of lights, and what I've personally found is, if I get the launch, I'll, generally speaking, decimate people. I mean, I destroyed a 135i that was like lowered, and it had rims, and it had something performance stickers over the windows and stuff. So it seemed like a tuned up 135im, whatever the fuck you want to call it. And I destroyed him. First gear, like as soon as the lights went, I pulled away like there was no tomorrow. Then I shifted to second, probably got to about 70 kilometers per hour or so. And at this point, I checked my mirrors, and he had just finished like wheel spinning off his launch, and he was closing in on me dramatically. Don't get me wrong. And when I hit about 80, he was pretty much next to me, and then I I had shifted it into third, and then at that point I let go because I'm not interested in going any faster than that on public roads. Anyway, so I shifted it to third, and at this point he wanted to move into the turning lane that I was also going to be taking, but I was still so close to him that he couldn't. He'd had to brake to come in behind me, and that's my point. The initial acceleration to me is what matters, because that's a Touge build for you. And the fact that I was equally able to play, I'm not going to say that I beat him, because let's be fair, he was pulling on me like there was no fucking tomorrow. But I was able to play quite well with a BMW 135i, which seemed to be a tuned up version. The fact that I was able to play with one to about 80 kilometers per hour is quite respectable in my personal opinion, because that means on a windy Touge road, again what I've purposely built my car for, I'd probably wreck him, because he'd be too busy having to drift the corners because of an excess amount of power versus grip, where I'd probably be able to grip it, and at very least I'd drift it, but I'd be able to, it would be an exceptionally controllable drift where you're kind of on the edge of drifting and gripping, if that makes sense. It's a very weird scenario. If you guys know what I mean, you know what I mean. If you don't, you're going to be completely lost there. Again, with that being said, I was at a set of lights the other day, and I was there was a Golf GTI, and I pulled away. I wasn't sure if we were going to go for it or not, and then he was like, nah, so he just put his foot down like straight from the lights whilst I had just normally pulled away. And then when I saw him like my door's length, I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I mashed the throttle. Now I have a very small turbocharger, so it spools up very quickly, and I got on boost very quickly. But ideally speaking, you want to launch the car because it builds the boost correctly and so on and so forth. Anyway, and he landed up gapping me, is my point. Pretty badly, not terribly, but badly. Okay, I will take the shame there. I am ashamed of the fact that I lost to a GTI, but again, and my thoughts there are, a lot of guys tend to build their cars for that scenario, for light to light. However, again, same scenario as the BM, and most likely that Golf as well. If we got onto a windy road, I'd decimate them. They would probably not be able to keep up because of the suspension setup on the Miata and how easy it is to flick in and so on and so forth. My personal opinions and thoughts and stuff, obviously you guys can give me your thoughts as well and what you think. And if you agree or disagree, everyone's obviously entitled to their own opinion. However, everyone else is wrong and I'm right, and that is my opinion, so yes. No. I don't know, yeah, just that's, I find a lot of fun in that kind of driving style. I suppose it's really all just down to your driving style, but I thought I'd mention in a video, get you guys thoughts on the situation, see what you guys think. Was there anything else I was going to say? I was going to tie in with this video about clean culture versus just wreck-it culture. Because I recently went to a show and we were all kind of disappointed because a kind of riced out 350Z won versus some other very clean builds, and we were kind of talking about it and discussing that it's usually the cars that just have stuff and more stuff, like as much stuff as you can cram into the car, they tend to win over the cars that have less stuff, but to the normal person they seem a bit clean. But I'm thinking I'm probably going to leave that for another podcast and cars, probably next week's podcast and cars, to be honest with you. So yeah, I'm also devastated because I went to 2 different events this weekend and I accidentally recorded the one full event on the wrong setting on my phone, and I cannot open any of the files, so I've lost all of that footage. So that sucks. But yeah. I suppose it is what it is, and we will have to kind of just go with the flow. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I will see you on Friday, where where I'm showing you actually the show that I was at on this past weekend. So yeah. So until then, guys, I hope you enjoyed. I have nothing else to say, so yeah, cool. Cheers, bye.